This last year I met my reading goal of 50 books, and this is all 50 in order of when I read them. The very first book that I read this year was Bittersweet by Susan Cain. I picked this up at a bookstore in Savannah that Sam and I always go to, and I picked it up because I have said my entire life that the word bittersweet is my favorite word in the world. It is my favorite books, my favorite movies, my favorite music, and so I was immediately intrigued. And reading the back, that is exactly what this book was to be about. Was about why certain people are drawn to the bittersweet things of life. And it was just one of the most creative nonfiction books I've ever read. And I just absolutely really enjoyed my time reading this, especially as my first book of the year. I felt like it was something that helped me look inward and got me off to a great start. So I gave Bittersweet 4 stars. Next, I read Priscilla Presley's memoir, Elvis and Me. This was after I went to go see Priscilla, and I was just really intrigued by their relationship and wanted to know more about it. I originally read it on Kindle first, and then eventually got the paperback copy to go ahead and mark it up, because there were just so many quotes that I wanted to be able to keep track of for later. I gave Elvis and Me 3.75 stars. I was really shocked by how much I was interested in this story as someone who didn't necessarily know a lot about it before seeing the movie and wasn't like a huge Elvis fan. But I just thought that the way that Priscilla wrote was so interesting. She wasn't afraid of really getting into the nitty-gritty parts of their relationship. She seemed very self-aware of how weird their relationship was. So I really enjoyed my time reading this, and if you're interested in it at all or enjoyed either of the Elvis movies last year, I would highly recommend reading this one. The next book of the year I do not have anymore. It was Creatures by Chrissie Van Meter. This was a book I had picked up randomly. It was a used book that I was just really intrigued by the cover of, and I don't remember too much about it, and it was okay. I gave it 2.5 stars. It was a completely fine book in my opinion, but it just didn't feel like she had a lot to say, and it clearly didn't stick with me. So yes, so that was Creatures. And then right after, I read The Wife by Meg Wolitzer. This is a pretty well-known book, and I know that a lot of people really respect it in its genre. But I also gave this one only 2.5 stars. This is one of those that I feel like I was probably just annoyed with the characters enough the whole time that it kept me from really enjoying it. I think that the plot could have been interesting, but I didn't necessarily like the way that it was written and the characters were identified. And so this was one that I just didn't end up liking in the end. Both of these books were the start of trying to get through my physical TBR. So these were 2 that were short enough that I decided not to DNF them, but didn't end up liking them that much. Next, I read Kingdoms of Savannah by George Dawes Green. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I honestly think that it probably would translate better as a script for film or maybe even television, and would love to see that someday. I picked this up because Sam lives in Savannah, and I just love being able to read it and picture where they're at and know the streets that they're turning on. But I also just am so intrigued by the culture of Savannah and its history and how haunted it is. And so this one was good. It's something that I've continued to think about since I finished it. I don't know that it would be for everyone, especially if you aren't super familiar with Savannah. I don't think that it would be as intriguing or quite frankly even make a ton of sense. On February 24th, I did a reread of Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I accidentally last year reread it on the same day that I had read it the year before. And so now it's just kind of become a tradition to read it on February 24th every year. This is a 5-star book for me. I absolutely love it. I love the way it's written. I love so many of the characters, and it's just very quotable, as you will see. I picked this off the shelf the other day and I was like, maybe that's too many tabs. But that's just how quotable it is. I absolutely love this. This is one of my, I think, only 2 rereads for the year. Right after my Daisy Jones and the 6th read, I picked up Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I started it a couple times, but I always had a hard time getting into it. I was told to go into it blind, which is the way to do it, but it can be hard to get started when you don't understand what's going on. This was my favorite book of the year. This is a 5-star book. I haven't stopped thinking about it. It's very short, so I do intend to reread it, hopefully before too long. I can't say enough good things about this book. I also don't want to tell you too many things because, again, if you're considering reading it, I would try to go into it not knowing anything about it. What I will say is that my favorite thing about this book is how many genres it crosses into. It is so unique in that aspect. I've never read a book that delves into so many different genres. Most importantly, it deals with the haunted house sub-genre, which is one of my absolute favorites, and it does it in such a fascinating way. And it's so good, and I highly recommend. After Piranesi, I wanted to read another haunted house book, so I picked up the only one I had on my TBR at the time, which was Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. I have never heard anyone talk about this book, and I think it's so interesting. I picked it up originally because of this cover. It's just wonderful. It is a 4-star book for me, so there were some things, especially towards the end, that I would change. It was also a little hard to get into. The time period that it's set in is just a little hard to read. But at the end of the day, it was a haunted house thriller that kept you guessing until the very end. And if you like any kind of suspense or mystery or thriller, I would give it a try. I also would just love to have more people to talk to about this book. I don't know why the cover is showing up that way, but next I read Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This was like one that I randomly bought when I first got my Kindle, and I was so excited, so I bought a couple of brand new books, and I just hadn't gotten to it yet. Unfortunately, I gave this 3 stars. It wasn't totally my thing. There were a couple of things that I really liked, but at the end of the day, I was just kind of finishing reading it to have finished read it, and I don't totally understand where all the hype comes from for this book, which I don't like saying, but yeah, it wasn't my thing. I do not have the copy anymore, but the next book I read was A Simple Favor by Darcy Bell. This is another one that I was reading off of my TBR. I really enjoyed the movie and thought that it was very entertaining, and so I thought I'd give the book a try. If you've seen the movie, there is one particular storyline that I had completely forgotten about, that it dives further into in the book because you hear it from Anna Kendrick's character's perspective, and I totally forgotten about it, and that just didn't work for me. At the end of the day, it was entertaining, but it didn't have anything new to say. I rewatched the movie afterwards, and it was still entertaining, but I think a little bit less than how I remembered it when it first came out, and it felt so shocking and different and new. And I'll still watch the next installment in the series when it comes out, but I didn't really care for this book. I give it 2.75 stars. Another book off of my TBR. I guess I should say this TBR section was all reading books that were adaptations that I had seen the movie and picked up the book for. And so this is Where I Leave You by Jonathan Tropper. This was a movie that I absolutely fell in love with, I think like 2 years ago. I just love that like big family chaos vibe kind of movie. The Family Stone is one of my all-time favorite movies, and it kind of reminds me of that. And I The book, I gave 3 stars. It wasn't terrible by any means. I still liked the idea behind it, but I think you're reading it from the Jason Bateman character's perspective the whole time. And it was around this time of the year that I picked up so many, and I DNF'd so many books that were from like a man-child narrator's perspective, and I just couldn't do it. I was so tired of it. I stuck with this one because I knew that I liked the other characters, or a lot of the other characters at least. But I got really tired of his shit very quickly. So this one was 3 stars. Next, in the adaptation world, I read The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This was a tough read, but I have not stopped thinking about it, and I gave this 4 stars. I watched the movie again afterwards. This is a Netflix film with like everyone under the sun. Tom Holland plays the main character, but it kind of deals with this generational sin or generational trauma in this one specific town in Ohio. Again, it was a tough read. It is very extremely dark. I would read the trigger warnings before you start it. Very good. Very spooky. Coming out of my adaptations on my TBR, I went into my YA fiction. First, it was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I have spoken about this book in many, many videos now. I just absolutely adore John Green. I'm so thankful for him. This book meant a lot to me, and I wish I hadn't waited so long to read it. I gave this 4.5 stars. It was very relatable and just so quotable, and has that beautiful, bittersweet John Green edge to it that I just can't get enough of. Next, I read The Spectacular Now by Tim Tharp. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. It means so much to me. I have a very personal connection to this book, and for a long time I honestly didn't know that it was based on a book, and then I finally picked it up, and I had a hard time getting into it because of my personal connection to the movie. I almost gave up reading it probably a quarter of the way through, and then got hooked like you do in the movie and didn't want to stop reading it. So I give it 3.5 stars. I think I still prefer the movie to the book, just because I do like the few things that they changed to fit a film adaptation. And also, so much of this book, you have to root for our main character, Sutter, or it doesn't really work. You're kind of like, what am I reading this for? Why do I care if this kid succeeds or not? Because he's a jackass. And so when he's played by Miles Teller in the movie, you get that charm and that charisma and that reason to keep rooting for him. And so I do think that the movie works better, but I still enjoyed's the wrong word, but I still did like the book. The last book of my YA TBR is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. This is my sister's favorite book, and I had never read it before. It just never came up. I think I missed it a little bit, the age that I was. And I had watched the movie before. I knew exactly what happened, and I still was absolutely devastated by this book. Mostly because it's some of the most unique writing and structuring that I've ever seen in a book before. It's just so creative, and one of those books that you stop afterwards and you're questioning, how did the author possibly come up with that concept? So this was a 4.5 star book. I gave This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub 3.75 stars. At the end of the day, it's not something that I think about a lot or that I think I would ever go back to, but I really liked the heart behind this book. And this is one of the first times that I started to realize how much I liked like realistic fantasy, but otherwise it wasn't necessarily something that I felt super connected to while I was reading it. The next two I read on my Kindle from the library. First was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. I gave this, unfortunately, 3.25 stars. I absolutely love The Silent Patient and The Maidens. These were two of my favorite books of last year, I believe. And I was so looking forward to his next book. I love the cover and the idea of it, the like Hollywood aspect of it was so intriguing to me, but I think I'm figuring out that I don't necessarily love like a whodunit when it delves more into that subgenre than just a straight like suspense thriller, and that was very disappointing. It was still well written and had some really interesting characters. I think that it just wasn't necessarily done as well as the last two of his books. Then I read Piglet by Lottie Hazel. I gave this 3.75 stars. I liked the way that Lottie Hazel wrote her main character's mania in particular. I gave that one 3.75 because I have continued to think about it a few times, but it wasn't my favorite of the genre. The next book is a book that completely changed the way that I read for the rest of the year, and that is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I really like romance movies. I liked romance books of the YA genre growing up, but for some reason I had really cut myself off to reading romance as an adult, and there was a lot of like pretension that came with that. But everyone had been raving on Book Talk about Just for the Summer, and another book that I read this year, Funny Story. And I really like the covers of both of them, and I just needed to know. I needed to know. And so I saw this randomly one day at the library. It was available. I picked it up. I took it to the beach. And I was mad the whole time that I was liking it so much, which was so stupid. I should just enjoy the things that I am enjoying instead of considering this and that and the other. But I really, really love Just for the Summer. I gave it 4.25 stars. After Just for the Summer, I decided to kick it back to my OG summer romance YA series, which is The Summer I Turned Pretty. Last year, I read the first two, and I still needed to reread the third, We'll Always Have Summer. I've spoken many times about this series. It means the world to me. It came around at a very influential time in my life and still just like delights me every time I read it, being able to pick up some of the things that I like held on to and made a part of my personality as a kid. So this is a 4.5 star book technically for me, but the whole series itself is 5 stars. Absolutely love, love, love. The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I had gotten this from the library originally. It was just a book that always intrigued me. I love the title. I gave it a 3.75. I think I might like it more on a reread. This ended up being my favorite of Ashley Poston's books. I love specifically how this one kind of turned the haunting genre on its head to turn it into a romance. And I am looking forward to rereading this one at some point. Then I went back and read the other two books in the Just for the Summer world, and read Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. And I really enjoyed, especially the male main character, the love interest in this one. And overall, I think I just really enjoy the way that she writes. But yeah, loved this. This I gave 4 stars. Then I read the 2 romance books off of my TBR that I already owned. The first was 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I really appreciated the way it was written, and the flashbacks to her childhood and kind of explaining what was going on in her current day life. I also discovered through this book, which is like a no-brainer based on like the way I feel about things in real life and the movies that I like, but second chance romance is like, I think, one of my absolute favorite tropes. And this book helped me figure that out. But I think at the time I was just in the mood for these like lighter romance books, and this is much more of a drama, and I think I just wasn't totally in the mood for this at the time, but I really liked the way it was written and plan to look into Tia Williams' other books. Then I read Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. This is another one that I had bought and had on my Kindle, and I did not like the main character of this book at all. She had no sympathy for anyone else's point of view, especially like the main male love interest that she supposedly was like falling in love with, and that drove me absolutely nuts. The beginning of the book takes place in like an SNL style comedy TV show that is like super well revered, and I loved reading kind of the backstory of how that goes down every week. But the second half also dove into pandemic time frame, and I think it was just a little too soon. I still feel like anytime I read about it in a book, it's just like a jump scare. I'm like, why are we writing about this already? And also, how did you have time to publish a book already about the pandemic? But yeah, this was, I think, by far like my least favorite romance that I read. But I turned it around next because I read Funny Story by Emily Henry. This I also gave 4.25 stars. This and Just for the Summer were tied for me as my favorite romance books that I read this year. This was just delightful. I had read one Emily Henry before. It was Happy Place, and I didn't really enjoy it. I loved our main female character, and I loved the main male love interest, who everyone described as Nick Miller from New Girl, and I couldn't agree more. I highly recommend picking this one up and trying it if you're trying to get into the romance genre. Then I finished out the Abby Jimenez world and read Yours Truly. This one wasn't my favorite so far as like the story or our main female character. However, I got 4 stars because the main male love interest, Jacob, is so amazing. Jacob deals a lot with social anxiety, and it is a huge part of him and Brianna's relationship and how they get to know each other. And I absolutely loved the representation there and felt like my social anxiety shows up in a lot of the same ways that Jacob's does. And so I just absolutely loved reading that. It was written so extremely well, and I'm so thankful to have read that. Then I read 2 Emily Henrys back to back. I did Beach Read first. And as far as I understand it, this is a lot of people's like favorite of hers, or like their classic favorite of hers. And honestly, this is my least favorite of the ones that I read this year. I did not care about the main characters at all, unfortunately. I did semi-enjoy their romance, but most of what I liked about this book, because I did give it 3.5 stars, is our main character January's relationship with her dad throughout the book. And there are some really, really beautiful quotes regarding that relationship in here that I absolutely cried over. So there are some beautiful things in this book. I just didn't necessarily care about the romance, and since this is like what it was supposed to be about, and I've heard so many people say that they love the 2 of them together, I was just really surprised and taken aback by that. On the other hand, I did love Book Lovers, and I gave this 3.75 stars. The main character deals a lot with the importance of being an older sister and how she wants to take care of her younger sister. And I myself am an older sister with a younger sister, and so I absolutely loved the depiction in that and how it changes her life. I told ya, I was on a romance roll. So next I read The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I gave this one a 3.5 star. I did enjoy reading it. I think I just didn't care for our main character quite as much, especially as I did The Dead Romantics, where I absolutely loved our main character in that one. But again, I think I really like Ashley Poston for the realistic fantasy that I was starting to get into. So I did enjoy this one. I just didn't necessarily enjoy our main character as much. I do not have it yet. But next, I read The Ministry of Time by Kayleen Bradley from the library on my Kindle. This was a book that was at the top of my want to read list, and it was magical. I gave it 4.5 stars. I do think that it lost its way a lot towards the very end of the book, but the first half, or first 3/4 really, was so insightful and thoughtful and so quotable that I felt like it almost didn't matter how the book ended over how much I enjoyed the first part. 2 years ago, one of my absolute favorite books of the year was Mother Thing. Loved Mother Thing so much. Was so excited when I saw she had another book out, and did not enjoy this one at all. I was so sad. I gave this one 2 stars. The idea behind it, the idea of being a new mother and what motherhood means for women, and losing yourself to that, is something very important that should be talked about. But the whole plot that was used to talk about those things didn't make any sense. Then I read Welcome to the OC, The Oral History by Alan Sepinwall. I didn't know how to rate this one because it's nonfiction, and it's basically just an interview with the cast and crew of the early 2000s TV show, The OC. I enjoyed it and I didn't enjoy it. I really liked the way that it was written and put together, and I can only imagine how hard it was to collect, gather, and then edit all of those little sound clips from people together. But I was kind of sad because I felt like it gave me a new viewpoint on the making of the show, the way that the people, especially the young actors in the show, didn't like their job or didn't like being there every day, and that made me kind of sad, so I don't know if I would recommend it. Then I read one of my favorite books of the year, Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. This is, I think, the first in many books that I read particularly about an age gap relationship that is mostly focused on just a woman thinking through her thoughts. And Megan Nolan, I just really like the way that she wrote and the thoughts that she came up with. Very quotable. I marked up many things. And a couple quotes were so beautifully alarming to me in the way that they described something that I felt like I related to. And so I really love this one. I give it 4.25 stars. Then I read The Girls by Emma Cline. I gave this one 3 stars. It was okay. But at the end of the day, it wasn't something that stuck with me, and the writing wasn't anything completely spectacular in my opinion. So this one was okay. I then read Bluebeard's Castle by Anna Biller. I didn't know anything about this. I just really loved the copy of the book, which I have shared before, but it's just got these absolutely magical inserts, and this is very gothic, and that's something that I had figured out that I was getting into. Also a general haunted house vibe, and I think it just had a really good hold on what the tone of the book was. I gave this 3.5 stars, but yeah, I really enjoyed my time reading it. Another age gap romance, The Latinist by Mark Prinz. This is set with the background of a dark academia world, and a lot like The Silent Companions is a book in that category that I have never really heard people talk about. And it's very surprising because it feels like something that dark academia TikTok would get a hold of and really like. I gave this 3.75 stars because it's something that I've continued to think about a lot and is very quotable. If you like mythology, I would highly recommend this. This is like a modern reimagining of Daphne and Apollo. And so that, again, with that academic setting, I thought was just really, really intriguing. My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing, I gave 3.25 stars. It was a very quick read, as much as this is like pretty chunky, and I did want to know what happened, but besides that, the writing didn't feel super new to me, and the characters were not of any importance. It's not something that I've returned to at all. Then I finally read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I wanted to love this and I didn't. It was very smart. I love Shakespeare. I love Willie Shakes. And I love Hamlet. And so there were some aspects of this book that I really, really liked reading. But at the end of the day, I think specifically Maggie O'Farrell's writing does not churn correctly in my head. Sam loved this book, and she also loves Maggie O'Farrell's other books, and it just didn't work for me, and I was so sad about that. But I am very much looking forward to seeing the movie. The cast is pretty great. But yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars. A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. Unfortunately, although this is the newest, this was my least favorite of Ashley's books so far. I really liked the idea of the story. Did not like the main character, or at least the way she narrated. However, it did have some really great moments. In particular, the classic third act breakup that most people complain about and like is usually of no use actually made perfect sense in this book. And that was delightful. I gave this 3.25 stars. Then I read my beloved cult classic by Sloane Crosley. This was one of my top 3 favorite books of the year. I love the idea of this book so much. I love the way she writes so much. I found it very quotable and very relatable, and also called out one too many times by some of the quotes in this book. I gave Cult Classic 4.75 stars. Then I read A Very Nice Girl by Imogen Crimp. This is, I think, the last book in my age gap books on my TBR. This one did not work nearly as well for me as Cult Classic and Acts of Desperation did. I gave it 3 stars. I felt like, in comparison to those two especially, it felt like it didn't necessarily have anything to say. I didn't feel like it was super quotable, and the main character didn't feel incredibly real to me. And so this one just didn't really work for me. Similarly, I listened to this one. I listened to Before We Were Innocent by Ella Berman. I picked this one up because I really liked the cover, and I found it intriguing as a mystery, but at the end of the day, felt like I wasn't really like in suspense at any point, and I like the suspense thriller or suspense mystery, and so it just didn't really do anything for me. So this is 3 stars. I've spoken about it a couple times, but my next read was Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. This is his memoir that came out less than a year before he passed. His death was absolutely devastating and was something it took me a really long time to be able to watch Friends and not just like cry thinking about it. If you want to hear more about it, I would watch the blog that I talk about it in. I have a really hard time explaining this. I am kind of disappointed that I read it. Down to the last few, I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I gave this 3.5 stars. I felt like it was pretty comparable to The Atlas 6, which I really, really liked last year. Especially like that it dealt with Yale and the Ivy Leagues is always something that I've been interested in. At the end of the day, I felt like it didn't stick with me as much as Atlas 6 did. I liked its depictions of hell and other things that it dealt with, like in that trope in its fantasy, but its characters didn't stick with me by any means, and there were only a handful of quotes that I marked. So yeah, this one was a 3.5, but I did follow up with a kind of similar vibe, which is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and this was a 5-star book for me. This was one of my favorite 3 books of the year. I absolutely just adore this book and the way it was written. One that I definitely feel it's just a Kelsey book. It's quotable in the way that I like, and I just absolutely love this. So I'm looking forward to trying to read more V.E. Schwab this next year. This was a 5-star book. Throughout the year, Sam and I were working on East of Eden by John Steinbeck for our book club, and this is my second time that I read this, but it was still just as beautiful as it was the first time, and I truly look forward to reading it again in a couple of years. It honestly is so much easier to read than I remembered or would have suspected from it. So if that, I don't know, is something that has ever kept you from reading it, I would go ahead and push ahead and try. It's just beautiful and so quotable. So I absolutely love this. This is a 5-star reread for me. Finished up my last romance of the year with my last Emily Henry, which is People We Meet on Vacation. I know that this tends to be people's least favorite, but I loved it. This was probably like my second favorite Emily Henry. I really liked its characters, and I love a friends to lovers trope. Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austen, I gave 3.25 stars. I read it because I loved her previous book, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead. But I just didn't enjoy this one quite as much. I really like the way that Austen portrays mental illness and OCD. I think that they do a really great job of like show don't tell, but at the end of the day, this one felt less relatable to me personally than their previous work. And then back to my Savannah books, the last book for Sam and I's book club of the year. The last book Sam and I read this year for our book club was Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. This is like a classic Savannah book. I think I gave this one 3.75 stars because at the end of the day, I really liked the first half of the book that was more about like the characters of Savannah and characterizing Savannah more so than the trial that it gets into. And then I ended the year, unfortunately, with my least favorite book of the year, a 1-star, All About Love by Bell Hooks. I was too far into it and too close to the end of the year that I just needed to finish it, unfortunately. And I was so surprised by that because I feel like a lot of people worship this book and Bell Hooks. But it did not work for me. I think a big part of that is I didn't realize how religiously based it is, especially towards the end of the book. But also because I think this is probably a good book for someone that maybe is starting their therapy journey or isn't necessarily a super reflective person on their own. But everything that she was trying to like make a point of, I was like, yeah, and it just didn't feel like it was teaching me anything. So maybe it was just the wrong book for me, but I did not care for this at all. So those are the 50 books that I read this year. All in all, I think it was a pretty good reading year, and I'm so happy to have had so many 5 stars. So